Good evening, guys. Welcome to another lesson on JavaScript. Today's class is JavaScript 104, and we are doing conditional statements and logical operators. Those two things are critical to any programming language, because when you say something is conditional, it means you want to make a decision based on what is happening in your program. Computer is all about deciding. Computer is all about making choices. Computer is all about, you presenting options and then you deciding what needs to happen. That's the major part of computer. And conditional statements are very important because they decide what your program will do. They decide the flow in which your program is going to run. I mentioned to you that JavaScript code runs from top to the bottom, from left to right. It executes those codes in that pattern. With the understanding of that, we are going to treat conditional statements in that pattern. We've defined conditional statement as our ability for the system to determine what to do based on the condition that you've put to it. You could say, if this condition is met, do this. If it is not met, do that. That is the easiest form of a conditional statement, which means you have two options. It's either you do this when this condition is met, or you do the other when the condition is not met. That's the simplest form of a conditional statement. So let's go ahead and put the code into works and see how does the code look like. Most of the time, conditional statements start with if, because you want to check a value to see if it is equal to what you want it to be. So I'll use the word if. That's a keyword now. If is a keyword in JavaScript and in many programming language. So the syntax in which you can use to write a conditional statement is as follows. You use the if keyword and you open a bracket. In that bracket, what goes in there is a condition that must be met. I'm writing this in English so that you can relate with it. This is not the way it's going to be written. Then a block of code that determines what will be executed if those conditions are met. So whatever the condition that you put inside this if side, once it becomes true, the block of code that follows immediately will be executed. The part here that says this condition is another expression entirely. This expression must always result to true before the code can execute. So let's do an actual example. And the condition here, I will just write something very simple. I will just say true. So we're taking this step by step. If true, execute this. Obviously, we know that true is true. So this code here is going to run. Let's go ahead and do our just console log something. So I end up saying true. If the condition is true, work with what is inside here. And this is how the conditional statement is written. Then what follows next is what we call the else statement. The else statement is what happens if the condition is not met. The first line of code that happens is starting from 1, 2, 3. Nothing happens on all these parts. When it gets to 3, it starts the conditional statement that says if it is true, run. But because we are passing a true statement here, which is true, it executes this console log, which we saw on our log on the bottom here. And I'm now saying that what if it is not true? You can actually include another statement which is called else. Hence we have else here. So that means you now have if and else, meaning you have the ability to say if a condition is met, do this. If the condition is not met, do that. So I'm going to do console. I'm going to repeat the same thing here. Console.log, and this time around I'm going to say false. Obviously, we will never get to the part where false is going to be called, because at all time our code here is always true because we put in true there. So anytime that is true, the true will be called. Our code will never get to this section. Of course, we're going to get to how we're going to do this example. So before we get to this part where we're going to do this example, let's move on to the next thing, which is the logical section. That's the logical operator. How do we get this part to understand the logic? Because we can't just be saying if true. We want to put actual context to our conditions. So let's give an example that will better explain what we're talking about. Let's say we have x is equal to 5, or x has been imputed through another means. You know x is equal to 5. Then you want to confirm if truly x is equal to 5. If x is equal to 5, you should say true. That's the idea. Then how do you do that expression? Remember what I put here, I say condition to be met. So in this part, how you do those conditions is by using what we call logical operators. There are logical operators that allow you to test if x is equal to 5. And those operators are as follows: equal to 5. So you can see the way I've used the equal sign. I didn't just use one equal sign, I used two equal signs. I'm going to list out all the logical operators for you guys to see. The operators that you use for conditional statements, I'm going to list them out. But this one I just used now is for equation sign, to equate, to check if the value on the left hand side is equal to the value on the right hand side. Now look at the code. Let's run the code again from beginning. Line 3 says x is equal to 5. You know that. And line 4 is saying, is comparing, is checking, is x really equal to 5? Obviously it is, because we know what line 3 says. Now because it is, it's executing line 5, which is saying true. And you can see that our code always returns true. Now let's falsify it and say, let's make x equal 6. What then happened to the code? Let's start reading from the beginning again. Line 3 says, let x is equal to 6. Line 4 is now saying if x, which we know is 6, is equal to 5, and we know it's not, what did the system do? It jumped to line 7, which is the else part of it, and execute line 8, which is, you're now seeing a false statement there. So that's how conditional statements work. Conditional statements check what you have here, and once it's not true, remember what I said, it has to be true before this if the first statement will be run. If it is not true, it jumps to the else statement. So this is the basic form of an if statement. And we're going to get to the complex one very soon, but let me just get the conditional logical operator out of the way. So let's talk about the operators that we have. So let's treat it inside here. One we've seen now is called double equal sign. Don't confuse it with one equal sign. This is called an equal sign. X is equal to 6. The second sign is a double one, meaning you are comparing if x is equal to 6. In this first case, line 3, you are assigning what is on the right hand side into what is on the left hand side. That's variable declaration. We already know this, before now. Now our x is equal to 6. What we are doing in this case, we are not assigning the value 5 into x. What you are doing is you are comparing, is really x equal to 5? That's what you are doing here, conditional statement. So double equal sign is for what? For comparison. So let's move to the next kind of comparison that you can do. This is just one comparison. There are a couple of them. So let's take it gradually. The first comparison we just talked about now is a double equal sign. So the second one I want to talk about is not equal to. My Visual Studio Code helped me to write this in a way that it makes sense. So let me change my font in my Visual Studio Code, because your own might not look like this, and this might become an issue for you guys. So let me quickly go and change my fonts, because you guys might not have the font I'm using in my system. I'm using Fira Code. Fira Code font allows you to do to make it very nice when you are doing something like this. And you can see the way it combines everything, and not equal sign is looking like really not equal sign. That is not the way the character looks like on the keyboard. So let me show you the way the character looks like on the keyboard, because you can't find this character on the keyboard. These are for people that have been coding for a long time. So let me remove these fonts. This is very good. So this is the font I'm using now. So I think this will better express what it is I'm talking about. Notice the double equal sign. Do you see the space between the equal sign? So that way you know that you are pressing equal sign twice. That's what gave us the double equal sign. The next one that I was about entering that made me discover that the font, is, I need to change the font so that you can see what I'm doing, is this. So you use the exclamation mark and equal sign. It means not equal to. And we're going to test out all of this. We just test out equal sign and I guess we are good. It's straightforward. We're going to test out all the ones I'm going to be talking about, but let's just take it gradually. Then the next one is greater than, which this one in mathematics we all know what this is. Then obviously once there's greater than, you're going to have less than. Then you know that you're going to have greater than or equal to. And finally we have less than or equal to. All these operators, you can use them logically to decide what kind of conditions you want to make. Now you can begin to think within yourself now, oh, okay, what kind of example can I do with this? Yeah, you can do quite a lot with what you have here. Remember what I told you this part should be. It's only when it's equal to true that this part will execute, irrespective of the condition that you decided that you want to put here. Whenever it equates to true, that's when this section will be executed. Else, it will pick this one. So let's go ahead and say, let's bring this code down here so that we can see as the code is executing and understand what's going on. So we've already tried the first sign here, which is double equal sign, which is equal to, and then we've seen how it works. How do you do not equal to? What's the point of this not equal to? Because it's possible that you want to do a comparison and say, execute this code only when this is not equal to this. So when you will now say x is not equal to 5, do you see what's going on here? If x is not equal to 5, can you tell me if that is true or false? Obviously it's true, because 6 is not equal to 5. So that condition is true, and then we will get this. Don't worry, we are going to treat this conditional statements somewhere else out of this screen so that you're going to understand how these things are computing. Remember what I said, this section will only run when it is true. X, which is 6, is not equal to 5. They are not equal to each other. So true will occur. So let's move on and try other parts. Let's try greater than. Is x greater than 5, which is 6? 6 is greater than 5. What did we see there? We saw true, because only when it is true that this section will occur. Let's try less than. Is 6 less than 5? Obviously is false. True, 6 is not less than 5. So we will get our what? We will get a false there. Let's go ahead and do the other ones. So you can practice the other ones, yourself. But let me just say greater than or equal to, so that you will see how it is evaluating and giving us a result. If x is greater than and equal to 5, it should do this. Yes, 6 is greater than and equal to 5. This one is either greater than or equal to 5. That's the nomenclature. Before we move into the next thing, I want to show you some comparison that you can do yourself to understand how conditional statement works. So if you go to the console, you can try it. 1 is equal to 1. So you can see that 1 is equal to 1 is giving me an error because 1 is not a variable name. So I say 1 is equal to 1. I can write conditional statements directly to the console and it will execute it. Do you see that? 1 is equal to 1. It says it's true. So I can say 5 is greater than 8. Do you see the result? You say no, it is not true, right? 5 is not greater than 8. So you can do some computations here on the console and it will just do those things for us, right? So this is another way to use the console to test out some things. And you can also do it on string, not just on numbers alone. You can do string, add Apple. You are now saying, let me say device name, just to make it make sense. Device name, right? So if you now say, if device name is equal to Apple, that's meaning the device that the person, let's say Apple, right? It should say you are using an Apple device. Then if it is not Apple, we can say you are using an unknown device. Obviously, you've seen this before in terms of when you do something and the system detects what you are doing and then it gives you a right message, and when you are using the opposite thing, it tells you something else. So this is the conditional statement in works. Let's say now we change this to Android. Do you see what happens? Immediately you change this to Android and you run the code, the system comes to line 11. You say, if device name is equal to Apple, of course it's not equal to Apple. What is it equal to? It's equal to Android. And then it goes and says you are using an unknown device. Of course you can say that you're using an Android device. I just want to make a statement here because I'll use this to address the next phase of our if condition. That is how you can also use it with string. Obviously, even though you can use less than or greater than, it doesn't really make sense to use greater than or less than, with strings. That is a little bit advanced class. Now that we've been able to capture the if and else, because we know that if is for positive and then else is for when the positive is not true. What if you want to capture other devices? Let me see, how many devices do we have? Let's say Samsung, so let's say Apple devices and Android, Google devices and Android, right? Let's say we have 3 devices, 5 devices. How do we then be able to capture these 3 devices? We want to put a message out, because it's possible that someone can have an Apple device, someone can have a Samsung device, or someone can have a Google device. How do you capture 3 devices? Because this is just, our if is just capturing 2. How can you make your if condition capture more than 2 choices? It's very possible. It's by introducing something else in between your else. And that is happening here. This is where we enter the next line of code. I'm about to do something different now. This is where we enter the next line of code. And the code, what is the syntax for it? The syntax for it is called else if. So we do else if, meaning we want to also check more things. We don't just want to check one and say, okay, if one does not do, move to the next one. We want to actually check more than one stuff. So now that I've checked for Apple, I actually still want to check if it is Samsung. So how do I check for Samsung? Of course, the way I check for Apple, you can check for Samsung that way. I say device name is equal to Samsung. Remember, what I'm doing is checking. And immediately I do that, I have to put my block of code that needs to run within the Samsung declaration or checking. Do you see now? My 14 and 16 happens to be where my code will execute if it is Samsung that was captured, or if the device name is Samsung. Then at the end, I can say unknown device. So here, I can go ahead and say, okay, my device name, whenever the code executes, we want to write a short code here that will run when it is Samsung. So I can just copy this and replace this to say I'm using a Samsung device. So let's go ahead and test our code. Okay, so let's see the code that we have. So let's change this to Samsung, right? So once we change that to Samsung, what happened in line 10? Line 10 says device name is Samsung. Then line 11 checks if it is Apple. Obviously it's not Apple. So what happens? The system goes to line 14, and this is why you need to understand the control flow, the flow of program. It starts from top to bottom. We are done. It has finished 13. Nothing happens. It goes to 14. It then do another check. Is the device name equal to Samsung? Obviously yes, because that's what we set it to be here. Then once it's equal to Samsung, what does it do? It runs to 15 and print out what we have there. It notices that it's not running else again. It just goes out and continue at 20. And that's what happens. And this way, you are able to execute more than one conditional statement. So you've been able to do like 2 conditions here. In fact, 3 conditions. So what happens if we enter Google? If you enter Google, what happens? It doesn't see any of these 2 as being a match. And then it says an unknown device. You can also go ahead and impute condition for Google, for example. So we just duplicate line 14, 15, 16, and we input Google code there. And say here, Google, and say using a Google device. So now we've made room for Google. So if it's Google that was entered, it will check and come around line 17 and execute this. And then if you now go ahead and say, which other device do we have again? Let's say Motorola. So if you say Motorola now, so it will say unknown device because you did not program Motorola in the system. I'm sure you guys would have seen something like this whereby we are using a device and it says can't find device. And these are the things that happen in the back end. So this is programming, guys. This is how programming works. So this is step 1 in using if condition. We're not done with the if condition. We want to go a little step higher again. So I'm going to wipe all these things and start all over again with the next batch of conditional statements, or rather what I call logical statements, because we need to I want to include something that will make us be able to do more comparison, because this comparison looks so simple, like, okay, this is so simple. There are more complex things you can do rather than just saying is equal to, is equal to, is equal to. Of course, we've already done greater than, less than, and not equal to. We've done that in the numbers. So I want to add one more thing to it, one more leg to it. Okay, so let's say we have let x is equal to 10 and say let y equals 5. I have two variables now and I want to check. And this my check is that I want to put the two variables to test, meaning I want those two variables to be exactly in a way so that I can compare two of them. Remember that the variable we've been comparing all this while were just one. Device name is 1. X we were comparing before is 1. Now I want to compare two things. And by the way, you can compare more than one things, not just two. You can compare like 10 things together to meet your condition. Remember, your condition has to be true before the first line of if is executed. So let's go ahead and say if x is equal to, remember our double equal sign, is equal to 10, which, this is cool. This works for us. Console log. And I'll just put true there, right? This has been working. We know this now. Nobody's, having issues with this. Now the ones we want to talk about is, let me put my else so that we'll always have our else there. Now, the next thing I want to introduce is how do we also compare? I want to compare x and y together. Now, if x is 10 and my y is equal to 5, I want to do this thing together, right? I want to be able to compare both of them together. That use these two variables in compare. Remember, I said you can compare more than two variables. So even if we have 5 variables, you want to compare, you want to subject all of them, into your conditional statement, you can. But of course, we're starting with 2. When you understand the idea of the 2, you can stretch it to as many variables as you want, as much as your program allows you to. Remember, depending on what we want to do, that will determine, what you're comparing. So let's go ahead and see, how do you logically combine conditions together? Before I write the solutions for you guys, let's look at all the logical operators that are available that I want to teach you guys now. So logical operator that you can use to combine or to compare two different conditions together is two operations, and that is what? The AND. That is to do what? To do for AND. And the next one is using two vertical symbol, or is also known as piping symbol, and it can also be called vertical slash, and also sometimes divider line. So, but this character, it's also there on your keyboard. You need to be able to locate it, and that character denotes an or sign, meaning it's either one of these things. We are going to do practical and then you're going to see it now, that the fact that x is 10 and y is 5, execute this. And I told you that to do that you have to use these signs, this logical operator, and which is appresent, twice appresent, and that's what you use if you want to do that. You want to compare both of them. Immediately you do this, this is what you have. It says, let's read it again from the beginning. If x is equal to 10 and y is equal to 5, execute this. Is that true? X is 10, that is true. Y is 5, that is true. It executes this. Let's move on to do another test, combining conditions together, because this is a condition. This is condition 1, this is condition 2. As I've said, you can have more conditions, and there are rules in combining those conditions. You want to know your results. What will be your result if you combine like 5 conditions together? What's the rule governing conditions? I'm going to show you those rules down so that you understand what's going on. How do we turn up to true? So let's go ahead and do the or sign. So to do an or sign, of course, we're still going to get a true, because what you're saying, the or, is that if x is equal to 10 or y is equal to 5, return true. So let's go ahead and then do something else. So let me use the and sign again. And this time around, we know our x is 10, but I will say 11. Immediately I do 11, it changes the equation and it gives us a false. Let's read it out and see if this, false is correct. Obviously it's correct, but let's read it out so that you guys can understand what's going on. The x is 10. Immediately you say x is equal to 11. this is false. This evaluates to false. We keep this false here, and then we say, and y is it? We know y is 5, so this is true. False and true is equal to false. So that brings me to this section where you need to understand the logic of condition. So logic of condition is very important that you need to understand, because you need to know what your code will result into before you execute your code. You need to be able to, in your mind, say, okay, oh, I'm programming for if this is Apple or an Android together, and I'll say these are smart device. So let's go ahead and do it so that you understand what I'm saying. Let's go back and say device now, device name, and let's do our Apple. And what I want to do here is I want to say let age is 18 years. If you are above 18 and is Apple, okay, let's just put that in the code. So what I want to do now is that I want to say if age is greater than 18, right? It should say that you can use, and then the device you are using is Apple. It should like say you are good to go. So if the age is above 18 years old, above or equal to 18 years old, and the device name is Apple, what should the system say? The system should say that, okay, maybe you are matured. You can say you are matured, right? So that's what we programmed here. So you can see what I did here. I said the two conditions have to be met before the system can say you are matured. If by some means I reduce the condition and say this one is 17, is greater than 18, let's say age, yeah, age is 8, yeah, age is also greater than, yeah, so this one will always be much. So let's go to, let's say 20. So if your age is, of course, what we are doing is not making sense. So because we want it that if it's older, you know, that it will say matured. So I'm going to change the condition to be less than or equal to. This is what I want to say. So that anything that is less than that age, it should say that you are not matured. So let's go to 17 now. So if you do 17, it should say that you are not matured. Use Android. Say not matured. Use Android. Yeah, so you can see how you are conditioning the system now. Then you can say, okay, what if it is Android that is here? So if it is my Android that is here, it will not even bother. It will just go ahead and jump to Android. Again, remember that you know that you can combine more conditional statements to treat Android conditions separately and pass different message to Android users. And you don't even need to include this one. You can just include only this side and just capture Android alone. So let's just capture Android alone and say else if the device is Android. Let's say you are good to go. So you can see that irrespective of the age, we are not bothered about the age. As long as it's Android, okay, let the person use it. But if you want to use an iPhone or an Apple device, you have to be more than 18 years old. And then if you fall into the device that will put in there, it will say you are matured. That's the condition that this is passing through. So this shows you how those pattern works. But what I want to show you now is how do you know when this will result into true? I wanted to express the logic of condition to you guys. So, and that says that true, you can practice this if you are watching this video again before you check out the answer. We're going to execute this together. What does true and true gives you? What's the result? True and true, right? What's the result? True or? Remember those terminology. The that sign means or, and the ampersand, double ampersand means and. So what does this give you? What does this and this gives you? You need to know this by heart. And you can include this to be more than 2. Remember I told you that you can have more than 2 conditions. This is condition 1 and condition 2. You can have as many conditions as your program allowed based on what you are programming. So here we are saying true and true, what does it equate to? True or true, what does it equate to? False and false, what does it equate to? False and true, what does it equate to? This one means that this section here, remember I said this section here we equate to something, either true or false. Then this section here we also equate to something, either true or false. Once you combine the two conditions with the logical operator that is in between, what will it equate to? If it equates to true, that's when this section will be executed. And you can do a test, which is what I'm doing here, to show you those results. So if you have the answer to those results there, you can test the results on the bottom that I want to do. So if I do true, and you can literally type it here. If you do true and true, your answer is true. So what that means is that as long as you have true, all true, and is an and, you have people that have done logical operator. If you do electronics or logic gates, you will understand this one very well. So you won't have issues with this. Then true or true obviously is also true, because if you have true or true, if you are choosing one, true or true, it will also be true. So if you do false or false is a false. False or true. And by the way, as I've said, you can have as many operator aligned together. You see what I did here? You can have them and it will execute what that is, because you can have more than one conditions pass across board, as I've said before. So false and false, sometimes this thing can be, oh, it's false. These things can be confusing too sometimes. So you have to also do this test yourself, to understand what's going on. So again, I'll give you guys an assignment to go and play with this true and false to see how many, to go and test yourself on this section to see how much you understand the true and false thing. So we want to introduce a new conditional statement. You also use it to change the flow of your code, and that is called switch statements. Remember that what we are coming from now is if and if else. That's what they call it. We just finished the if else conditional statement. What we are doing next is switch. Switch is also a way to do a kind of an if, but it has a different syntax altogether. So the syntax for this, and by the way, syntax is the pattern in which you must write the code to conform to the requirement of the platform that you are using, in this case JavaScript. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what we have. So what I do is I want to show you the syntax in which to write the switch statements, just the way I introduced the if statement. So the switch statement is written like this. You start with the switch keyword, and then you open your parentheses like this, where you then have your expression. This expression is not a keyword. I'm going to change it with a variable name, right? And what follows is block of codes. So when you see something like this, is block of code that wants to happen. You want to start writing block of code. We saw this when we are dealing with object. We saw this when we are dealing with CSS. We saw this when we are dealing with if condition, and we will keep seeing it more and more. So when you have something like this, it's like you want to start writing block of code. Okay, so when you have that, the next thing that follows, we're not done by any length. There's still more things we need to capture in terms of this syntax we're going to use. The next thing is to provide a case, because you are specifying that you want to write a switch, and then a switch comes with case. So they call it switch case. Switch case, just like you have if else. In this case, you have switch case. So once you do, of course, we also have more terminologies that will come in. But just let's take it gradually. So you do your case, right? So what case are you dealing with? You specify the case. What I mean by case is that what variable are you checking? When we're doing device name, we're checking against Android. We're checking against Google. We're checking against Apple, like that. So I'll say check against what? So these things will change. What I'm writing here, I will change them, right? And then you use this column. These are the syntax. This is the way you have to write it. And at the end, you then write your block of all your codes, what you want to happen. Code goes here. What you want to happen. And finally, you terminate what you are doing here. So that is all. That's how switch case works. That's how switch case works. Even though we are not done, I'm going to introduce more things gradually. But before I introduce the next thing, I want us to write a code here before I go further. So let's execute this code that we're seeing here. Let's make sense of it. So I told you line 7, switch variable name. So what variable name is it that we want to check? Remember in our if condition, we said if device name is equal to something, right? In this case, there's no if, there's just switch. And what variable are we putting in? What variable are we contending with? Do we want to, check? Is called device name. So I do switch device name, right? I've done that. What are we now checking against? We are making case for Google, we are making case for Android, we are making case for Apple, right? Those are the things we are making case for. So I'm going to put those cases here. So the first case is what? Is for Apple. So I'm saying if my device name case is Apple, do something here. I'm just going to do a console log like we've done before. Console log, and I'm saying that I'll say this is an Apple device. Just for us to be on the safe and an easy path, I'll just change this to Android so that we can write what is going on there. So if you see it now, let's look at what is happening. Let's read it from the beginning again and make sense of what we've written out. So we have our variable declared, right? And then the 7 is saying switch device, like we're checking device out. And we're making case for Apple. Once it is Apple, it should give us this. Then how do you make case for other things? How do you make case for Android? How do you make case for Samsung? Let's see how we do that. To do that, you replicate this code. Line 8 to line 10, you replicate it and you change the case. You replicate it, change the case, change the code base. So let's go ahead and replicate this. So we are doing for this time around, what are we doing for? Let's say Google, and then we say this is a Google device. So immediately you do that, of course you have to make your device name Google and see if this will pick it. So if you do that, you see that your code say this is a Google device. So we have that fixed. That is working. You can keep doing that continuously to pick the next device, which is which can be Samsung. And once you pass Samsung there, of course it will tell you this is a Samsung device, which is cool. Now remember in your if else, or rather your if statement, remember you have else. Do you guys remember what else does? Else, irrespective of what's going on, if it does not find a match in your if statement, it goes to else. So your switch also have something like that. Like if what we've provided, let's say we did Motorola here, Motorola, right? There's no Motorola here. How does it know what to go to? There's something that will help us with that. It's not called else. In this case, it's called default. So that way, if any of this does not work, it just goes to default. Notice our syntax. At each time we do break. When I'm done with my case, I break. When I'm done with my case, I break. When I'm done with my case, I break. Even when I'm done with my default, I do what? I also break. So let's go ahead and say what should happen if it is not any of these three. If it's not Apple, if it's not Google, if it's not Samsung, we should do what? We should just say maybe not recognized device or non-device. So we just do, and there we go. We have that, we've written a block of code that could make decision based on what the user entered or what is captured in a variable. You've seen how we use if to do it. Now you've seen how to use case to do it. And by the way, you can mix your code, you can mix your case and if together. Let's do that. Let's mix our if and our case together. Because the idea of all this is not just that you write a code in isolation, it's to combine all what we've learned together and execute the code with it. Remember that we've learned how to declare a variable and we've been using it all this while, right? We've been using it all this while, and then we'll be creating our strings and what have you. So the idea is what we are learning is that we can combine all what we've learned to, deliver one single stuff. So this time around, we can say let age is equal to 18. And I can go and say, even though here I've decided that this is an Apple user, right? I can say if Because the idea of what is happening inside this block of section here is that you can write a new code. You can write anything here. It's left to you. You can say that if age is now me writing an if condition now is equal to 18. Or let me just say, because I don't want to use one single 18, is greater than 18 or equal to 18, meaning the person is matured. I will now say console. So remember that this code will only run. This is how you should also look at what is happening in your code. You've written a code now that you think it will just work. It will only work on the condition that the device name is Apple. Look at where you place your code. Where you place your code is also important, and that's why you should understand how the flow of code is executed from top to bottom. And since what you did there is Motorola, your code will execute here. All these guys will be ignored. All what you've written here will be ignored, right? And it will just jump to Motorola. That's how it works. So what I can do here is, because I just want to make this code work, I can change this guy to Apple and see my code working. So he said this is an Apple device, and he said matured user, right? So that's what has happened there. So if you change your device name, so you can go and code other parts of this code or other parts of this segment and decide what you want to do. Of course, you can always write your else again after your if. If you want to write your else, you can always put that, and your code, will execute irrespective. And you can see this is how you now start writing code. Literally, you're already a programmer, because by the time you start making decisions yourself, you are literally a programmer already, because you are programming the system to make decisions based on that input. So, and that's what programming is all about. You're telling computer to do stuff based on what was captured, in the system. Your assignment for the week is very simple. Look at the if conditions that we've gone through and the select case condition we've gone through. I need you to give me the difference between the two conditions and tell me when is the best time to use each of these conditions. Thank you for staying to the end. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and turn on bell notification in order to be notified when we release new videos. See you in the next one.